July 13th, 2015 is a day Johnson Countyans will never forget.
911. Yes, I need help. Okay, where you at?
And for those who live along Kentucky 172 in the Flat Gap and Redbush communities, their lives are forever changed.
Where is Flat Gap 172?
For the next half hour, we'll look back at that day when a flash flood changed a community. And we'll see how that community continues to rebuild 1 year later. July 13th, 2015 was one of those days that meteorologists knew had the potential to be bad. Severe storms and heavy rain were in the forecast, and everyone was on alert.
Judge Executive was getting ready to have a fiscal court meeting late that afternoon, and I called him and I said, Judge, I'm not going to be able to make the meeting. I know I've got a couple things on the agenda, but you know, I probably need to stay at the office.
Just before 4 p.m., torrential rain started falling in northern Johnson County, and the water in Big Mud Lick Creek started rising.
I was monitoring the radio, I was watching the weather, and then the calls started coming in.
Honey, I'm trying to get them out there. I swear I'm trying. Stay where you're safe. Hell, I need to help my mom. She's trapped in the house. But you need to keep yourself safe. We are trying to get to that area to get everybody. You get in the water, you're going to be swept down just like everybody else.
There's all kinds of people can't find their family.
We've got people headed out that way.
In a trailer that got washed off on 172, and nobody can find them.
I mean, it's my family.
I know, hey. My family's out there too. Trust me. Honey, they can't get to them. They can't.
My two dispatchers that were on duty had a lot of connections out in this area, and they was having to take those type of emergency 911 calls from people they knew.
And that is what made this disaster so difficult for first responders.
People that I work with were known and been associated with the volunteer fire departments over the years. There was a point that got tough.
75 homes were either swept away or destroyed, dozens more were damaged, and 4 lives were lost. And as bad as that is, McClure says it could have been much worse.
We were blessed. If this event had occurred at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't even imagine how bad it might have been.
And while we have no official measurement of how much rain actually fell here in the Redbush and in the Flat Gap communities of Johnson County, Doppler radar estimated at some point during the storm 6 to 7 inches of rain per hour. That is hard to comprehend on flat ground. And then you put us in this mountainous terrain, and of course it's going to cause nothing but problems in the way of flash flooding. It's absolutely devastating, some of the results of what we saw.
And Lathan, this is your first time actually having your feet on the ground in this community, and you can see a lot of it has been cleaned up, but then you'll run across something like what's behind us, and that's such a stark reminder of the power of that water.
And the thing is, this is one house. I mean, this entire community was devastated by these waters. We're looking at one home, but there was so many others, so many folks that were affected by the flood waters. It's really hard to comprehend exactly what those folks went through that day, that night, and the weeks and months that followed.
But going back to what Gary McClure said just a few minutes ago, can you imagine if that amount of rain fell in this area while people were sleeping?
It's hard to really be thankful for anything in this situation, but considering that it happened in the afternoon, that is very helpful of getting the warning out. If this had happened, as you mentioned, early morning hours while people were in bed, I mean, the death toll could have been remarkably higher. And that is one of the importance of making sure you have some type, either your cell phone or weather radio, to get those warnings in case a flash flood warning, a severe thunderstorm warning, a tornado warning is issued, so that you know you need to take shelter and get to higher ground if a flash flood is occurring.
That's true. And you talked about being thankful. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to show how people throughout eastern Kentucky came together in the days and weeks after that flood to help this community start rebuilding. In March of 2012, when a tornado came through Johnson County, claiming 2 lives and destroying dozens of homes, the Johnson County Long-Term Recovery Group was formed to help victims of disaster. And last year, when the flash flood came through the Flat Gap community, that group was once again hard at work.
Within 2 days, this team was meeting, and we had funding. We did some immediate things, shelter, various other things to help folks that we could at the early stages.
McCool says because of the community's support they received following the 2012 tornado, they were able to put some money back for future needs.
Now, after the tornado, we had around $52,000 left after all the unmet needs were done.
That money allowed the group to hit the ground running after the flood. Several fundraisers were planned and held, with proceeds going to the Johnson County Long-Term Recovery Group, including the EKB-TV telethon that raised more than $60,000.
And welcome to a truly an historic event, one that we're not glad to be doing, but boy, we're glad to be here and make some stuff happen today.
McCool says donations kept coming in for months following the flood, totaling nearly $250,000. And he credits the dedication and hard work of his committee members for being able to continue to help flood victims a year later.
And we could have spent that within just a very short time. But we was very cognizant of being good stewards with that money, and we want to be able to ensure that we was helping as many people as we can throughout the whole process. So we're still active today. We will be there until the last person is served.
Although more than 250 flood victims have been directly helped through the Long-Term Recovery Group, McCool says the group has also had a hand in helping many more by working behind the scenes with other groups.
This isn't just long-term recovery that we're utilizing. We're utilizing a lot of other resources because we can do so much more with the partnerships that we've had with the county and the city and other nonprofit organizations that have come in and done volunteer work. So we even though you may not see long-term recovery there, probably long-term recovery has something to do with helping organize and coordinate and getting the people in and to help with the victims as well.
But he says their work is far from over.
We have been able to close out a lot of the closeout means we have met all their unmet needs and people have went on with their lives, which is what we wanted to do. But we have not completed all those yet because there's still some that are pending, that are open. We're there until the last drop, until we can serve the last family and everybody is back to some type of normalcy.
In the days and weeks following the flood, many who lost their homes began realizing those losses went far beyond clothes and furniture. I talked with several flood victims 3 weeks after the flood, when reality was starting to set in.
We've lived there 36 years, and we're going to have to just restart all completely over. Electric poles, your meter, you got to have things inspected. You have to do it from the ground up again. You just start all over.
For those who lost a loved one in the flood, the task of rebuilding seemed nearly impossible.
Joey has lost his mother, and we're here trying to see what we need to complete the arrangements and everything for her. We got to have deeds, we got to have birth certificates, you got to get Social Security numbers. You just got to do everything and close out her estate at the same time that we're trying to rebuild.
When we come back, we'll hear from more survivors of the flash flood and remember those who were lost, as we look back at the Johnson County flood 1 year later. As soon as floodwaters receded, reports started pouring in about missing people.
The information is credible that we have that they were last seen being swept away by floodwater.
However, just to answer your question directly, we're still in a search and rescue mode.
Early Monday night, early Tuesday morning, we had maybe reports of 15 people missing.
As you heard in the 911 calls, the first responders had to wait until the floodwater receded before they could get into the area, and several of them worked to help their neighbors despite losing their own homes. We spoke with James Hitchcock not long after learning that his wife had just escaped by crawling out of the window of their home.
That house right there used to be in front of where that cruiser is parked.
I recently met up with him at that same spot where he took a painful look back at that day.
As I finally made my way down through here as the water receded, I noticed my house was moved about 500 feet or so, and didn't see my wife. Just so happens she was across the road with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Didn't see my in-laws. They was gone. The whole house.
But he says somehow they survived, despite being swept away by the swift water.
He got sucked out of the house and got up on a piece of roof and rode that piece of roof down through there. Just so happens there was a little boy in a trailer down there that was in the water. He was able to pick him up, get him on that roof with him. My mother-in-law, she went from tree to tree, going all the way down through there. It's amazing that both of them's alive. Neither one of them can swim, but in that kind of water, you can't swim.
And like so many other survivors of the flood, the Hitchcocks say the support they have received has been amazing.
You couldn't go 15 minutes. Somebody stopping by asking how you was, if you needed anything. The community, they stood behind us from day one. From day one.
When the time came for James and his wife to decide where to put their new home, they just couldn't go back to the same place. They're still within sight of 172, but far away from Big Mud Lick Creek. Hundreds of other families are putting their lives back together, and they're thankful for the opportunity because they know other families weren't as fortunate.
Just like to thank God. He took care of us that day, and He brought my family out of it. But still, I hurt for the people that lost family.
A year later, reminders of the July 13th, 2015 flash flood are all around. From the water line inside Wade's One Stop, to abandoned houses, to bare foundations, it's evident that lives have been changed. 4 people were killed in the July 13th flood. 56-year-old Herman Eddie May Sr., 22-year-old Richard Blair, 74-year-old Willa Mae Johnson Pennington, and her grandson, 34-year-old Scott Johnson. When we return, we'll talk with Kevin Johnson, who lost his mother and son in the flood. Those who lost belongings or their home will never forget that day, but that especially holds true for the Johnson family, who lost 2 family members in the flood. Within hours of the flood, word began traveling about a hero, 34-year-old Scott Johnson, who was swept away by the floodwater while trying to save his grandmother, Willa Mae Johnson Pennington. Scott's father, Kevin, was home that day, and he said he knew things were going to be bad when he heard water gurgling in the ductwork under his mobile home.
And I heard somebody behind me, and I turned around and Scott was there, and I said, "Scott, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Dad, I've come to help you."
Kevin's mother lived next door, and he started trying to make his way to her through the water.
And I made it about halfway, and the water kind of swept me away, and Scott grabbed me and shoved me on toward the road.
Kevin made it inside his brother Joey's home, but Scott was determined to get to his grandmother.
And I hollered at Scott, and I told him, I said, "You can't make it." And the last words he spoke to me was, he turned around and he said, "I'm getting Nano." He called Mom Nano. He said, "I'm getting Nano out of that trailer."
After that, water began washing their homes off their foundations, starting with Joey's.
And then his place breaks loose. Now, we can't see Mom's trailer or anything now. And his place breaks loose. He comes up, and it starts spinning around. And we can't tell where we're at. And then all of a sudden, we stop. And the front starts raising up in the air.
That's because the Johnsons' vehicles and equipment was now under the mobile home. The next home to be swept away was Kevin's mother's home, with Willa Mae Pennington, Scott, and an 11-year-old still inside. That's when Scott knew he had to make a decision.
He jumped out of the trailer, and Logan come out, and they hung on to Mom. And they put her, I think she said there was some kind of a small deck, and they must have put her up on that deck.
By this time, several 911 calls came into dispatch reporting Scott, Logan, and Willa Mae in the water. But at this time, every route into this area was covered, and dozens of homes throughout a 7-mile stretch of Kentucky 172 were being washed away. But people watching from higher ground said they were okay, until the unthinkable happened.
My trailer popped loose, and when mine popped loose, it was coming right toward her. And she said she watched till my trailer got real close to them, and then they let go, and that's the last time she ever saw them.
For the next several days, Kevin and his family spent countless hours looking for Scott and his grandmother. Search crews found Willa Mae Pennington's body on Tuesday, more than a mile downstream. Then, on Friday, they found Scott. But Kevin says it was when he hit his lowest point that he found strength.
And by the time Sunday come around, I was in real bad shape. I could talk for about 20 to 30 seconds, and then there'd be a kind of like a big knot in my throat, and I couldn't talk any. I'd break down and start crying. I just couldn't. I was losing it, And when I went to church that Sunday, I always say, God is good and Jesus Christ is Lord. And when I got that out, the Holy Spirit picked me up out of that chair. And I stood up and yelled, "Thank you, Lord, thank you," for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And the whole church was standing up, holding their hands up. The Spirit of the Lord was there.
Nearly every survivor of the Johnson County flash flood says faith helped get them through the weeks and months that followed. And many say they believe they were given signs that let them know things were going to be okay. They say everything happens for a reason. Just a few hours after Willa Mae Pennington was laid to rest in this cemetery, Scott Johnson's body was found right behind me, within sight of his grandmother's grave. And family members say that was no accident, that in some way Scott was there when his Nana was laid to rest.
He's probably about a football field away from where Mom's buried. So that's 300 feet, That's probably about the distance that he was, and we didn't know it,
And when Kevin and his brother Joey were deciding where to live following the flood, they felt drawn to this piece of property, still on 172, but several minutes up the road. And during an ATV ride a few months ago on the new property, the brothers found out why.
And I saw that cemetery growed up. It was all growed up. And I asked Mark, I said, "Is that a cemetery?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You wouldn't happen to know who's buried there, would you?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Levi Johnson. Our great-great-grandfather's buried up on the hill. The cemetery that Mom had hunted for 5 or 6 years is here."
And Kevin has found a new appreciation for his son's music. His family says there's no question that Scott, who went by Scott Free, had a gift for being able to express himself through music.
A lot of times I'll go in the living room in there by myself and sit down for 2 or 3 hours and listen to his CDs. And I like his music. And then I like to, by hearing him talk, it's like I can hear his voice again. And that helps. That helps me.
And 2 songs in particular give Scott's family confirmation of 2 things. 1, if his time came, he was ready.
I'm trying to live my life right. I'm trying to educate myself, to how God wants me to live. And I think I'm doing good because I'm doing all this. And nothing this good comes without an intervention of God, But the day gonna come when I'm gone, when He sees fit to take me. Don't y'all cry when I go.
And that he loved his Nana.
Willa Mae Pennington, you're the cause for it all. I just gotta tell you that I love you, Nana. Willa Mae Pennington, you're the only thing I'd lay my life down right now to keep you in this world.
But one thing everyone living along Route 172 in Johnson County learned 1 year ago is how powerful Mother Nature can be.
This time of year, when it's dry, you can wade across that creek. It's just disbelief when you look at that creek and you say, "Whoa, that creek can't do that." But it can. And it did.
In the year that's passed since the flash flood, hundreds of Johnson Countyans have had to work to completely start over and rebuild their lives. And almost all of them will tell you it's been the hardest year of their life. But they will also tell you that right now, their community is stronger than it's ever been. Thanks for watching.